Here's a fact that'll blow your mind. Hitler was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. It sounds made up, but it's true. The history books you read in school contain many lies, and I'm here to set the record straight. If we can't trust our history teachers, then who can we trust? The ancient and incredibly painful art of foot binding was designed to make Chinese women more attractive to male suitors. Sounds familiar, right? But here's the surprise. It wasn't the only reason. Women did it because it also made them more suitable for certain jobs, like producing textiles while sitting down all day. If the Titanic hadn't hit that iceberg in 1912, it wouldn't have sunk, correct. But the infamous maritime disaster wasn't just about the collision. Issues with the vessel's bulkhead design, believed to be too shallow for such a big journey, and the quality of the iron rivets holding the hull together were also factors. There's more to the Titanic story than just an iceberg. You've probably heard that the Wright brothers single-handedly invented human flight. Not so. 9 years before they took off in 1903, Australian Lawrence Hargrave was suspended 16 feet in the air with a collection of box kites. In 1901, Gustav Whitehead of Germany reportedly traveled 50 feet in his own aircraft. Unfortunately, there's little evidence to back this up, but it shows the big names in history built on the work of others. Charles Lindbergh is famous for flying solo across the Atlantic non-stop in 1927. However, he wasn't the first to do so. The actual first transatlantic flight was made in 1919 by the NC-4 flying boat, which carried 6 naval pilots. It wasn't a non-stop flight, but they made the journey in 24 days. Einstein is regarded as a genius, but there's a myth that he struggled with algebra. In reality, Einstein was fantastic at algebra and math in general as a teenager. He wasn't perfect in every subject, but he was brilliant in his chosen field. Orson Welles' radio broadcast of War of the Worlds in 1938 is said to have terrified listeners. But in reality, only 2% of the audience was affected. The story of mass panic is more of a legend than fact. Alexander Hamilton is often believed to have been a strong abolitionist, but the truth is more complicated. While he did want to abolish slavery, he wasn't outspoken about it, and even bought slaves himself. He didn't exactly practice what he preached. George Washington's crossing of the Delaware River in 1776 is one of the most iconic moments in American history, but it wasn't exactly as it's depicted. Washington didn't cross in a small boat, like in the famous painting. He used a Durham boat, which was much larger. And it wasn't on Christmas Eve. It happened on the night of December 25th and 26th. The Wild West isn't as wild as people think. While life was tough, people weren't constantly in danger from bandits. Famous figures like Calamity Jane died from pneumonia and alcohol, not bullets. So maybe Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes applies less than we thought. Hollywood often depicts cowboys as exclusively white, but that's inaccurate. There were also African American and Mexican cowboys who made significant contributions to cowboy culture. For example, if it weren't for the vaqueros of Mexico, American ranchers wouldn't handle horses the way they do. The famous quote, "What we do in life echoes in eternity," from Gladiator, isn't quite accurate. Gladiators didn't die as often as we think. They were valuable assets, so owners made sure they received medical care. They weren't just disposable meat for entertainment. We all thank Alexander Graham Bell for the invention of the telephone, but the truth is more complicated. An Italian named Antonio Meucci created an electrical communication system to speak with his paralyzed wife. He couldn't afford to patent it, so Bell took the credit. The U.S. House of Representatives recognized Meucci as the real inventor in 2002. The Statue of Liberty is green, but it wasn't painted that way. The green color comes from a chemical reaction between the copper exterior and the air. Originally, Lady Liberty was supposed to be brown, but over time, the copper reacted and turned green. Knights were expected to follow the code of chivalry, but in reality, it was introduced to keep them in check. Knights were already known for their violent and unruly behavior, and this code was an attempt to control them, though it didn't work perfectly. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people didn't think the earth was flat. As early as 240 BCE, Greek geographer Eratosthenes calculated that the earth was a sphere. Many ancient thinkers understood the planet's round shape long before the medieval period. The Dark Ages weren't as dark as we're told. While the fall of Rome marked the end of one era, civilizations didn't collapse. In fact, during the so-called Dark Ages, people practiced astronomy and mathematics, and universities began to form. The Boston Massacre is often described as a bloodbath, but in reality, only 5 colonists were killed. The event was used as propaganda to rally against British authority, but the truth is less dramatic than the name suggests. Christopher Columbus is credited with discovering the Americas, but the truth is more complicated. The Americas were already inhabited by indigenous people. Columbus's arrival brought deadly diseases, which led to the death of millions of indigenous people. While he didn't set out to be a villain, his actions had devastating consequences. The Nile is famous for flowing north, but it's not the only river that does. In fact, there are at least 18 major rivers that flow in the same direction. The myth that all rivers flow south is just that, a myth. Betsy Ross is credited with sewing the first American flag, but this story is questionable. The actual designer of the flag may have been Francis Hopkinson, a Continental Congress member. The true origins of the flag are murky, but Ross's family promoted her involvement, despite no definitive proof. Eton, the prestigious English school, produced many notable figures, including the Duke of Wellington, who led the British to victory at the Battle of Waterloo. Wellington famously said that Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton, though it's unclear if he was being literal or poetic. And that's a wrap for today. But don't worry, that was just the tip of iceberg. For more jaw-dropping discoveries, check our other videos, and don't forget to subscribe us.